Hello, my name is Joel Christ. I'm a developer with iSoftStone, and today I'm going to be doing a walkthrough that will illustrate the process of programmatically publishing an Excel 2007 workbook to SharePoint Server 2007. Today I'm going to be using Microsoft Visual Studio 2008 to create a Windows console application to illustrate how to programmatically create an Excel workbook and publish the workbook to a SharePoint document library. So the first thing I'm going to do in Visual Studio is to create a new project. And I'm going to do it in C# today, and I'm going to create a Windows console application again. We're going to name it Publish Workbook. We're going to make use of the Microsoft Excel 2007 primary interop assembly to create our workbook, set the visibility of the worksheets within the workbook, and add some name ranges as workbook parameters. So the first thing I need to do is to add a reference to the Excel 2007 primary interop assembly. So I'm going to come in here in Solution Explorer, right click on References and choose to add a reference. And I'm going to scroll down and choose the interop assembly for Excel 2007 and say OK. Next we're going to add several using statements here. For the system.net, system.io namespaces, those are going to be used. We're going to use some classes in those namespaces when we publish our workbook to our SharePoint document library. And we're also going to add a using statement here for the Office Interop Excel namespace as well, so that we don't have to specify the fully qualified namespace path when we want to use the workbook and worksheet, etc. objects within that namespace. Okay, so let's add some code to our solution here. So that we're going to replace the main function, and we're going to add our own helper function to allow us to publish the workbook. So let's start at the beginning here and take a look at what the code is doing. First thing the code does is it declares some variables to hold references to the Excel objects that we're going to be working with. And then we declare some other variables for the workbook name, the worksheet within the workbook, the local path that we're going to save the local copy of the workbook to, the URL of the SharePoint document library that we're going to publish the workbook to, and a helper variable here to help us specify the default value for optional parameters to methods in the Excel primary interop assembly that we're calling. So first thing we do then is we come down and we create an instance of Excel, and we use that instance then to create a workbook and set up the default sheets by calling the add method on the workbooks collection of the Excel application instance. And then we hide 2 out of the 3 default worksheets and make the third sheet visible. And the reason we do this is so that when we publish this workbook to SharePoint and we open it then in Excel Web Access, we're only going to see the one worksheet, the published worksheet down here. The other 2 worksheets will not be visible. The next thing we then do is we create 3 named ranges at workbook scope named cell A1, A2, and A3. We set some values then in those cells and set the workbook parameter property on those named ranges to true. And what this will allow us to do then is, again, when this workbook is published to SharePoint and it's open in Excel Web Access will then expose these cells, cell A1, A2, and A3, as workbook parameters and allow us to change the values within those cells. We then come down and save a local copy of the workbook to our temp folder, in this case here, so that we can then get ready to publish that workbook that's been saved locally to the SharePoint document library. We come down and we release our references to all our Excel objects, and then we call our helper method to publish the workbook to the SharePoint document library. Okay, now our helper method here takes the local path of where the local workbook has been saved off to, and also the URL of the SharePoint document library that we want to publish the workbook to. Goes ahead and creates a put HTTP web request so that we can upload the file. It uses our default credentials. Allocates a buffer so that we can transfer the file contents into the request stream. We go ahead and get the stream on the request stream. We open the file, get a file stream on the local file that we created, and then go ahead and stream the contents from the local file into the request stream. Once we've done all that, then we go ahead and call the get response method on the request to actually make the put request. And if that all succeeds, we just simply return. Okay, so if we go take a look at the SharePoint site that we're going to upload this workbook to, that we're going to create in a second when we run our console application, you can see I've got a SharePoint, just a team site here. When we're just looking at the default shared documents library, it currently doesn't have anything in it. So let's go ahead and do F5 to build and run our application. Okay, so it looks like it ran successfully. Now if we switch over to our document library here again, do a refresh, we now see that we actually have our document loaded up here, and it was successfully published to the SharePoint document library. Okay, and if we come over here and click on the drop-down menu here for the item, or rather for the workbook in our document library, we can choose to view this in the web browser. So let's see if we can open this up in Excel Web Access. Okay, so now we have our workbook open in Excel Web Access. We see our single visible published sheet with our cells up here with their values in it. If we change the values within those cells, say apply, Excel Web Access successfully goes ahead and updates the values in our cells. Okay, so by using Microsoft Visual Studio 2008 in conjunction with the Excel 2007 primary interop assembly, it was pretty easy for us to create a console application that could programmatically create a workbook, hide a couple of the worksheets, add some name ranges to the one visible worksheet, and mark them as workbook parameters, and then use HTTP put to publish that workbook to a SharePoint document library.